Miles had been dreaming of this moment for months. The quiet drive home, the peace of open fields, the comfort of seeing his father's land again after years away. The road stretched before him in the soft evening light, and his truck's engine hummed a steady rhythm as he turned down the familiar dirt path that led to the lake. It had been almost 2 years since he'd seen it. 2 long years spent overseas in deployment, serving far from home, far from everything he cared about. His father's property had always been his peace, a place where life slowed down, where he could breathe and remember why he fought. But as his truck came to a stop near the old wooden post that marked the entrance, something felt different. The air was still, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet he remembered. It felt heavier, unnatural, like the land itself was holding its breath. He stepped out, boots crunching against the gravel, and looked around. The first thing he noticed was the fence. There had never been a fence before. Now, a tall, clean metal boundary ran across the property line, with bright red signs reading "Private Property, No Trespassing." His chest tightened as he took a few steps forward. The lot, once open and wild, had been cleared. Fresh soil was piled near the lake's edge, and construction equipment sat idle beside newly framed houses. He blinked, disbelieving. This was supposed to be his land, his father's land, the one thing left behind for him. Miles slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded paper he had carried since his father's funeral. The deed to the property, signed and sealed years ago. He compared the address again, running his finger over the printed line. It was the same. This was his land. But what stood in front of him didn't belong to him anymore. As he took another step closer, a voice broke the silence. "Excuse me," a woman's sharp tone called from behind him. He turned to see a woman in her mid-40s walking quickly down the gravel path. She was dressed neatly, with a bright blue blazer, heels too high for the dirt road, and a clipboard clutched against her chest. Her smile was thin, her eyes sharp. "Can I help you?" she asked, though her tone didn't sound helpful at all. "This is a private development site. You're not supposed to be here." Miles looked at her calmly. "This is my land," he said simply. She blinked, then laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "I said," he repeated quietly, "this is my land. My father owned it before he passed." She shifted her weight, smirking. "Well, I hate to break it to you, sir, but this lot was purchased by the HOA last year. It's part of the Maple Creek subdivision project now." He frowned. "That's not possible. It's never been for sale." She shrugged casually, flipping through her clipboard. "Actually, it was. The owner," she looked down at her paper, pretending to check, "apparently abandoned the property. HOA reclaimed it, listed it as vacant, and sold it legally." Miles took a slow breath, trying to stay calm. "There's no way my land was listed as vacant," he said. "I've been deployed overseas. I've been paying the taxes automatically through my service account. That land has never been abandoned." She crossed her arms, giving him that practiced look of authority people used when they thought they were untouchable. "Look, I don't know what story you're telling me, but you can't be here. The HOA owns this land now. You'll need to leave before I call security." His eyes stayed on hers, steady and cold. "You should double-check your facts before you call anyone," he said. "Because I never sold this land. And I can prove it." "Then prove it somewhere else," she said sharply, her patience thinning. "This is private property." She turned and gestured toward the construction site. "You see all this? The HOA invested thousands into developing this area. It's part of the community plan now. So, if you're some ex-owner trying to reclaim what's gone, I suggest you take it up with a lawyer." Miles looked past her toward the new houses rising from what used to be his father's open meadow. Every board, every nail, every patch of disturbed soil felt like an insult to his father's memory. "Who approved this sale?" he asked quietly. "Our board did," she said proudly. "Under my supervision. I'm the HOA president here." The smirk on her face didn't fade. She looked at him as if he were an inconvenience, not a man standing on his stolen land. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have real homeowners to talk to." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her mid-step. "What's your name?" he asked. She turned, clearly irritated. "Karen Wilson," she said, raising her chin. "And you are?" "Miles Carter," he said slowly. "U.S. Army." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, maybe surprise, maybe guilt, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Well, Mr. Carter, thank you for your service," she said flatly. "But that doesn't give you ownership rights." She turned again and started walking away. Miles stood there for a moment, watching her disappear toward the row of unfinished homes, her voice fading as she barked orders to the workers nearby. He looked back at the land, his land, and something in him shifted. He wasn't angry, not yet, but a quiet determination began to rise inside him. The kind that came not from pride but from duty. He had spent years following orders, serving others, protecting what was right. Now, for the first time, he would protect something of his own. He knelt near the edge of the fence, brushing the dirt with his hand. The ground felt rough, freshly disturbed. He could still remember planting wildflowers here with his father as a kid, both of them laughing as the lake shimmered under the afternoon sun. He remembered his father saying, "This land will always be ours, Miles. No matter where life takes you, this will wait for you." And now it was gone, or at least that's what they thought. He stood, his jaw tightening as he looked toward the new homes again. "Not anymore," he whispered. He took a photo of the property, the fence, and the construction equipment before walking back to his truck. As he drove away, the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows over the road. In the mirror, the land grew smaller, but the fire inside him grew larger. When he got home, he pulled out the box of documents his father had left him. The original deed was still there, signed, stamped, and untouched. He flipped through the pages and saw something strange. Recent documents added at the back. He frowned. He hadn't put those there. Someone had accessed the property records and refiled them, listing vacant and unclaimed under his lot's legal description. The dates matched the time he was overseas. "They knew," he said softly. "They knew I was gone." The next morning, he went to the county office, his uniform neatly pressed, his expression calm but cold. The clerk at the counter looked up nervously as he handed her the file. "I need to know who changed these records," he said. She scanned the pages, her eyes widening slightly. "Sir, these were filed by the Maple Creek HOA committee. But they shouldn't have been able to do that. It's county land registry, not theirs." "So how did they?" he asked. She hesitated, glancing around. "They have friends in the council," she said quietly. "They've done things like this before, but never with military property. If this is yours, sir, you need to report it immediately." Miles nodded, his jaw tightening. "Thank you. That's exactly what I plan to do." As he walked out, he passed a group of people in the lobby, residents from the same neighborhood, holding folders and shaking their heads in frustration. One of them muttered, "HOA fined me for painting my door the wrong color again." Another whispered, "They tried to tow my truck from my own driveway." Miles stopped for a moment, realizing that his stolen land wasn't just about property. It was about power, the kind that bullied people who couldn't fight back. But he wasn't one of those people. He had faced worse than corruption, and he never backed down. That evening, as the wind rustled through the trees outside his window, he opened his laptop and began typing a report addressed to the Military Legal Division. The subject line read, "Illegal sale of protected land, active duty ownership violation." When he finished, he leaned back, the glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes. The battle had started, not one fought with weapons, but with truth, patience, and the kind of quiet strength only a soldier could carry. And as he looked out at the horizon, he whispered to himself the same words he had once told his men overseas, "We take it back. All of it." The next morning came quietly, but for Miles, the calm didn't bring peace. It only deepened the weight sitting in his chest. The sun had barely risen when he stepped outside, coffee in one hand, the stack of documents in the other. The early morning mist rolled across the hills, and the faint sound of birds echoed from the lake. It should have been a peaceful sight, But all Miles could see in his mind was the image of his father's land fenced off, stolen under the excuse of paperwork and greed. He had fought in deserts and war zones, seen corruption destroy cities far from home, but he never thought he'd face it on his own soil. He spent the morning double-checking every file, cross-referencing county data with his original deed. The more he looked, the clearer the picture became. The HOA hadn't made a mistake. They had orchestrated this from the start. They'd waited until he was deployed, claimed the land as abandoned, and filed for community reclamation under the Vacant Property Act. It was a loophole, one meant for empty lots and neglected buildings, not a soldier's inheritance. Miles knew laws like these well. He'd worked on property stability programs in military zones overseas. This wasn't ignorance, it was manipulation. Around noon, he drove to the county records building again, dressed sharply in his uniform, not for intimidation, but because it demanded respect. Inside, the same clerk from yesterday recognized him immediately. "Sir, did you find something?" she asked softly. He nodded, placing the deed and the fraudulent copy side by side on the counter. "This signature," he said, pointing to the fake document, "wasn't my father's. And the witness listed here doesn't exist. I checked. This isn't just a bad filing, it's a crime." The clerk's eyes widened slightly. "You're right. This shouldn't have gone through. But I can't remove it myself. You'll need to appeal through legal channels." "Already on it," Miles said calmly. "I've filed a case with the military legal office. This land was owned by active duty personnel. That puts it under federal protection." Her expression changed from nervous to serious. "If that's true, sir, they're in big trouble." He nodded slowly. "That's the idea." As he turned to leave, she stopped him. "Be careful," she said quietly. "The people who run that HOA, they have deep connections. You're not the first person they've gone after." Miles paused at the door, his voice steady. "Maybe, but I'll be the last." Later that day, he drove to the HOA office again. The building sat on a neatly paved street lined with identical houses, each one with trimmed lawns and spotless driveways. Everything looked perfect on the surface, like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. But Miles knew better. Corruption didn't always look dirty. Sometimes it looked polished and proud. When he stepped inside, a young receptionist gave him a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you?" she asked politely. "I'm here to see Karen Wilson," Miles replied. Her smile faltered. "Mrs. Wilson isn't taking meetings today." "She'll make time," he said. "Tell her it's about the land she sold while I was serving my country." The tone in his voice made the room colder. The receptionist hesitated, then picked up the phone and spoke quietly into it. Moments later, Karen appeared in the hallway, her expression tight. "You again?" she said sharply, walking toward him. "Mr. Carter, I already told you, that property isn't yours anymore. You can't just keep showing up here." Miles met her glare calmly. "Then you should have thought about that before you forged my father's signature." Her face froze for a second before she quickly recovered. "That's a serious accusation," she said, her voice defensive now. "Do you have proof?" "Enough," he replied. "But don't worry, I've sent it to people who know what to do with it." She scoffed, trying to sound confident. "You think the military cares about some small-town property issue?" "They care," he said quietly. "Because this isn't about property anymore, it's about law. And you broke it." Her eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." He leaned closer, his voice calm but heavy. "Do you really want to find out?" The tension between them hung thick in the air. She looked away first, straightening her blazer. "You'll regret crossing me, Mr. Carter. We have lawyers, investors, people who won't take kindly to your threats." "I'm not threatening you," he said. "I'm warning you." He turned and walked out, leaving her speechless for the first time since he met her. Outside, he took a deep breath. He didn't like conflict, but this wasn't about pride, it was about principle. By the time he got home, his phone buzzed. It was an email from the Military Legal Division confirming receipt of his report. The message was short but powerful. Case received. Under review for violation of Soldiers' Property Protection Act. Expect response within 72 hours. Miles leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. Progress. Finally, something was moving. But he knew this was only the beginning. That evening, he decided to take one more drive to the property. The sky had turned orange, the air warm with the faint scent of sawdust from ongoing construction. He parked his truck near the edge of the road, far enough to stay unnoticed. From there, he watched workers hammering, laying bricks, building what they thought was a neighborhood. Every nail they drove into the soil felt personal. One worker noticed him and shouted, "Hey, you can't park there. This is HOA property." Miles didn't respond. He simply stood by the fence, silent, staring at the land that used to belong to his family. A few of the workers whispered among themselves, wondering who he was. Eventually, they returned to work, though unease lingered. He stayed there until the sun slipped below the hills, then quietly walked back to his truck. As he drove away, he passed a group of neighbors standing outside their houses, watching him. One of them, a middle-aged man, gave him a sympathetic nod, as if he knew. Miles nodded back, grateful for even a silent gesture of understanding. When he reached home, Sarah, his late father's sister, was waiting at the porch. She had been helping him organize the legal paperwork. "You look tired," she said softly. "You sure you're ready to fight these people?" He gave a small smile. "I fought worse." "They'll come after you," she warned. "They always do when they're cornered." "Then let them," he said, walking past her toward the house. "They don't realize who they're dealing with yet." Later that night, he received a call from an unknown number. When he answered, a familiar voice spoke through the static. "You're making a big mistake, soldier," Karen's voice hissed. "You think you can scare me with your uniform? This isn't a battlefield. It's a neighborhood, and I run it." Miles stayed silent, letting her speak. "You walk away now," she continued, "and maybe I'll forget this little trespassing stunt. But if you push me, I'll make sure no one believes a word you say." "Finally," he replied, his tone calm but sharp. "You should have checked who I really am before you tried to threaten me." "What's that supposed to mean?" she snapped. "It means," he said, "you didn't just steal from a soldier. You stole from a federal officer with authority over property security under military jurisdiction. And now, you're under investigation." There was silence on the other end. Then the line went dead. Miles placed the phone down slowly, the faintest hint of a smile crossing his face. He didn't enjoy confrontation, but justice wasn't about comfort. It was about doing what was right, no matter the cost. He looked out the window toward the horizon where his father's land once stood and whispered to himself, "They wanted a war over this land. Fine, I'll give them one. But mine will be clean, quiet, and legal." The next day, he sent every document, recording, and statement to the military audit team. And as the email left his outbox, he knew something had changed. The game wasn't about land anymore. It was about who would stand when truth finally arrived. The sun rose behind heavy clouds the next morning, casting long gray shadows across the road that led to Maple Creek, and Miles felt that same heaviness pressing against his chest as he drove toward the courthouse. It was the day his formal case would be reviewed, and though he'd faced bigger battles overseas, this one carried a different kind of weight. Personal, quiet, and close to home. The courthouse steps were crowded with residents, some from Maple Creek and others from nearby neighborhoods, all curious after hearing rumors that the HOA had been accused of stealing a soldier's land. As he walked past them in his pressed uniform, whispers followed him like ripples in still water. Some people nodded in quiet support, others looked away nervously, and a few, likely Karen's loyal followers, glared at him as if he were the villain. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low murmurs. At one table sat Karen, her lawyer beside her, both pretending to look calm but clearly tense. At the other table, Miles stood alone, no lawyer, no entourage, just truth and discipline in his posture. The judge entered, and everyone rose. The air thickened as the hearing began. Karen's lawyer was the first to speak, his tone dripping with arrogance. Your Honor, this entire case is a misunderstanding. The HOA acted within its rights to reclaim and develop land that was unoccupied for over 12 months. We have the legal documents here proving it was considered abandoned. He waved a file dramatically. The judge nodded for him to continue. Furthermore, this man, Mr. Carter, cannot claim ownership simply because he says so. Property rights require maintenance, oversight, and engagement. He left the land for years with no response to HOA notices. Miles listened quietly, his face unreadable, his hands resting calmly on the table. When the lawyer finished, the judge turned to him. Mr. Carter, would you like to respond? Miles stood slowly, his voice steady and low but carrying enough authority that the room fell silent. Your Honor, I didn't abandon anything. I was deployed overseas serving this country under active military orders. My taxes were paid automatically through the defense pay system. I have proof that I was on duty the entire time they claim I abandoned the land. He opened a folder and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. These are federal deployment records and tax confirmations. The judge reviewed them, nodding slightly. Continue, Mr. Carter. Miles took a breath. When I returned home, I found my father's land fenced off and under construction. I later discovered that the HOA forged signatures to transfer ownership, including my late father's name. The witnesses they listed don't exist. They sold my land while I was deployed, and they did it knowingly. A few people in the audience gasped. Karen's lawyer quickly stood. Objection, Your Honor. There's no evidence those documents were falsified. But before the judge could respond, Miles spoke again, calm as ever. Actually, there is. He pulled another folder from his briefcase. I forwarded all of this to the military legal office. They investigated and found that the signatures were digitally fabricated using scanned documents from county archives. The HOA had access to the files through a former council member. I also have an affidavit from the property registrar confirming that no abandonment notice was ever filed by me or my family. He handed the documents to the bailiff. The judge's brows furrowed as she flipped through the pages. These are serious claims, Mr. Carter, she said. Do you understand the implications? Yes, Miles replied firmly. And so do they. Karen's composure finally cracked. Her voice shook as she leaned forward. He's lying. He's making this sound like we're criminals. We followed procedure. Miles didn't even look at her. If you followed procedure, why did your board submit transfer papers using my father's signature 4 years after he died? Her mouth fell open, but no words came. The judge looked sharply toward her lawyer. Is that true? The lawyer stammered, flipping through his notes. Your Honor, we'll need to verify those dates. The judge's voice hardened. You'd better do that quickly. The rest of the hearing unfolded like a slow, unraveling thread. Every piece of evidence Miles had gathered pointed to one conclusion. The HOA had committed fraud. By the end of the session, the judge ordered a temporary hold on all Maple Creek property transactions and requested an external audit. Karen sat stiffly, her face pale. When the judge adjourned, she stood abruptly and stormed out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Miles didn't chase after her. He simply gathered his papers and left quietly through the side exit, not for drama but because he had no interest in gloating. Outside, a small group of residents approached him hesitantly. One older man spoke first. We didn't know, son. We thought you'd sold it. They told us you didn't care anymore. Miles gave a small, tired smile. That's what they wanted you to think. Another woman stepped forward. She fined us for everything. Flowers, paint, even our mailboxes. We were too scared to say anything. He nodded slowly. You don't have to be scared anymore. It's changing now. Later that evening, as he drove home, his phone buzzed with a message from Major Daniels, the officer he had contacted earlier. The message read, Federal audit authorized. Agents will arrive at Maple Creek within 72 hours. Stay available for statements. Miles exhaled slowly, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. The military was now involved, and once they stepped in, no amount of local corruption could hide behind county paperwork. The next day, word spread across the community like wildfire. Residents whispered that federal agents were coming. Some panicked, others rejoiced quietly. For the first time, the HOA board members weren't feared, they were afraid. Karen, however, didn't stay quiet. She gathered her remaining allies at the community hall that night, her voice loud and desperate. "He's trying to destroy everything we've built," she shouted. "That land was useless before we improved it. He left it to rot, and now he wants to ruin us because of some technicality." But her words didn't have the same power anymore. The crowd's faces were tired, doubtful. They'd heard too many lies. A few people even walked out before she finished speaking. One of her own board members muttered under his breath, "He's not the problem, Karen. You are." When she heard that, something in her eyes changed, a flash of panic mixed with rage. The next morning, as Miles stood outside his ranch polishing his old truck, a black SUV pulled up. Two men in suits stepped out, badges visible on their belts. "Mr. Carter," one of them asked. "I'm Agent Brooks with the Federal Property Commission. We're here to begin the audit." Miles shook his hand firmly. "You'll find everything you need in those files," he said, pointing toward a folder he'd already prepared. Brooks smiled slightly. "You don't waste time, do you?" "Not when someone steals my home," Miles said quietly. Over the next few hours, the agents toured the site, questioned workers, and collected evidence. They photographed documents, copied contracts, and interviewed locals. By the afternoon, word spread that the HOA office was being officially investigated. Karen stood outside her house watching as the agents walked past, her confident posture gone. When she saw Miles drive by, her glare could have cut glass, but he didn't even look her way. He had bigger things to focus on. That night, as the wind rustled through the tall grass of the ranch, Miles sat on his porch, watching the distant glow of lights across the lake. For the first time, he allowed himself to relax slightly. The fight was far from over, but now the balance had shifted. Justice was moving, not with noise or rage, but with quiet precision. And as he looked up at the stars, he whispered to himself, "Dad, I told you I'd protect this land. And I will." The next few days unfolded like the calm before a storm, the kind of silence that hides chaos beneath it. Pine Ridge County buzzed with quiet gossip, and every conversation carried the same name, Miles Carter. People who had once ignored him now spoke his name in hushed tones, some admiring his courage, others fearing the fallout of what he had set in motion. The HOA building stood unnervingly quiet, its glass doors locked, its offices half empty, and its leaders avoiding the public eye. But Miles knew better than to mistake silence for surrender. He had seen this pattern before, in combat, in politics, in power games. People like Karen didn't crumble right away. They circled, plotted, and waited for a new opportunity to strike back. He was ready for it. The military investigators had begun their audit, combing through years of files and financial ledgers that told stories more damning than anyone expected. Illegal transfers, secret payments, and names of council members on the HOA payroll appeared in the evidence. Yet, even with the truth closing in, Karen tried to fight back in the only way she knew, through manipulation and drama. The fourth morning after the audit began, Miles woke up to the sound of his phone vibrating non-stop. He picked it up and saw several missed calls, followed by a flood of messages. "Karen's going live. Turn on the news. She's blaming you for everything." He turned on the TV and there she was, standing confidently in front of cameras, her expression composed but her tone venomous. "I want to make something very clear," she said firmly, her voice echoing through the small local news studio. "The man who's attacking me and this community isn't a hero. He's a government bully using his position to destroy an honest neighborhood organization. He's bringing federal agents into our lives over a simple paperwork misunderstanding." Miles watched her carefully, noting every word. Her strategy was textbook: play the victim, twist the narrative, make him look like the aggressor. The reporters nodded sympathetically as she continued. We built Maple Creek to be safe, beautiful, and orderly. And now, because of one man's personal grudge, good people are losing sleep, fearing for their homes. The camera zoomed in on her as she took a deep breath, faking composure. He can wave his uniform and his titles all he wants, but that doesn't give him the right to intimidate civilians. Miles turned off the TV slowly, his jaw tightening but his expression calm. He had been trained not to react to provocations. Truth didn't need to scream. But Sarah, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway, wasn't as calm. She's lying to everyone again, she said angrily. People will believe her, Jack. She sounds so convincing. Let her talk, Miles said quietly. The louder she yells, the easier it'll be for the truth to drown her out. That afternoon, he received a call from Major Daniels again. We saw the broadcast, Daniels said, his tone grim. Our team's finishing the audit today. Once we publish the report, her lies won't stand for a minute. How bad is it? Miles asked. Worse than we thought, Daniels replied. They sold not just your land but 2 others under false claims. They even used HOA funds to pay off local officials who signed the fake documents. It's a full-scale fraud operation. Miles exhaled slowly. Then it's time the public sees it. That evening, the investigators held a press briefing at the county courthouse. Reporters gathered in a tight crowd as Agent Brooks from the Federal Property Division stepped up to the podium. After a full audit, he began, we found clear evidence that the Maple Creek HOA conducted multiple illegal property transactions, including the sale of land owned by an active-duty military officer currently under federal protection. We have also identified misuse of funds and falsified signatures. Gasps rippled through the room. Arrests are pending for HOA board members involved in these transactions. The investigation remains ongoing. Cameras flashed, microphones filled the air, and the story exploded across the state within hours. Karen's broadcast was wiped from the headlines, replaced with bold text reading, HOA president under federal investigation for land fraud. That night, as the sun set over the hills, Miles stood by his truck overlooking the ranch. The wind carried the faint sound of voices from across the lake. Neighbors gathered in small groups, talking about the scandal, about how the truth had finally come out. Some of them even called his name across the road, offering thanks, but Miles only waved politely. He wasn't fighting for fame or revenge. He was fighting because it was right. Still, he knew Karen wouldn't go quietly. People like her didn't accept defeat. They denied it, delayed it, or dragged everyone else down with them. And he was right. The next morning, just before dawn, his phone buzzed again. This time it was Sheriff Collins. Miles, you might want to come down here, the sheriff said wearily. Karen was picked up an hour ago for interfering with a federal investigation. Miles rubbed his temples, half relieved but not surprised. What did she do this time? She tried to break into the HOA office and destroy the files, Collins said. Security caught her on camera with a bag full of shredded papers. When they stopped her, she started yelling that the government was stealing from her. Miles was silent for a moment. She just couldn't stop, could she? No, the sheriff said. Some people can't handle losing control. But I thought you'd want to know. It's over, at least officially. After hanging up, Miles sat quietly for a long while, staring out at the morning light spilling over the ranch. The fight had been long, exhausting, and bitter, but in that moment, it finally felt finished. Later that day, news of Karen's arrest spread across the community like wildfire. The same people who once supported her now whispered in shame. Homeowners who had feared the HOA's power began removing the Maple Creek rules signs from their yards. Some even came to Miles' ranch to apologize. We didn't know how deep it went, one man said, his voice sincere. We just thought she was doing her job. You don't owe me an apology, Miles replied kindly. You just deserve a fair place to live. In the following weeks, the county dissolved the Maple Creek HOA entirely. The land developers pulled out of the project, and the community voted to reorganize under new leadership. When the final paperwork came through restoring Miles' ownership, He stood alone by the edge of his property, looking out over the calm lake where his father once fished. The land was his again, every inch of it. But what mattered more wasn't just reclaiming property. It was restoring honesty to a place that had lost it. That night, Sarah brought 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him on the porch. "So," she said, smiling softly, "what now?" He looked out at the quiet fields and the stars beginning to appear above. "Now," he said, "I rebuild. The right way." She nodded, and for the first time in months, neither of them said another word. They just sat there, letting the silence fill the air. The kind of silence that meant peace, not fear. But deep inside, Miles knew that peace had to be protected, and if anyone ever tried to take it again, they'd find out that some battles don't end. They just wait. The next few weeks passed in an uneasy calm that felt like the quiet after a long storm. The neighborhood was slowly starting to breathe again. Without the HOA's grip tightening around every fence, mailbox, and lawn, people began to live freely for the first time in years. Children rode their bikes down streets that used to have no playing signs. Families painted their homes the colors they actually liked, and the air felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from everyone's shoulders. But even as the sun returned to Pine Ridge, Miles knew better than to believe peace came without shadows. He had seen this kind of calm before, right before someone tried one last desperate move. He spent his days fixing up the ranch, cleaning the land that had been disturbed by construction, and restoring the old lake path his father once used. But every time his phone buzzed or a car slowed outside his gate, he felt that small twinge of tension again, the same instinct that had kept him alive in combat zones. One afternoon, as he was stacking lumber near the barn, Sarah came rushing out of the house, her face pale, holding her phone. "Miles," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you need to see this." She handed him the phone. On the screen was a local news headline. Former HOA president released on bail, claims she was targeted by federal corruption. The image beneath it was of Karen walking out of the courthouse, head held high, eyes cold, and a thin smile across her face. The reporter's voice played over the video clip. Karen Wilson, the disgraced former HOA president of Maple Creek, has been released pending trial. In an exclusive statement, she claims she is the victim of a political setup led by a military officer using his position to manipulate property laws. Miles watched in silence as the clip continued. Karen spoke directly into the camera, her voice calm but full of venom. "I've been wrongfully accused. I was defending our community from illegal land claims, and now I'm being punished for doing my job. The man accusing me has government connections, and I won't stop until the truth comes out." Sarah looked at him, worry written across her face. "She's turning it around on you," she said. "Again." Miles set the phone down, his jaw tight but his voice even. "Let her talk. The truth doesn't change because someone's afraid of it." But deep down, he knew this was dangerous. Karen wasn't fighting for freedom. She was fighting for revenge. And she still had friends, people in local offices who owed her favors. Over the next week, strange things started happening. A few of his neighbors reported that someone had been asking questions about him, about his job, his deployment, even his finances. Then, one evening, he came home to find a black SUV parked across from his gate. When he approached, the vehicle drove off slowly, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. He didn't chase it, but he took note of the license plate. The next morning, he called Sheriff Collins. "I think she's digging again," Miles said. The sheriff sighed. "Wouldn't surprise me. She's desperate. But don't worry, we've got her under watch. The Bureau's case against her is strong. Her lawyers are just trying to stir public sympathy." "They'll fail," Miles said quietly. But even as he hung up, he knew this wasn't over. The following weekend, the HOA case took another twist. Karen filed a civil counterclaim, accusing Miles of defamation, emotional distress, and abuse of authority. It was absurd, but it made headlines. "She's trying to wear you down," Sarah told him one night at dinner. "She wants to drag you into another fight." "Then she'll find out I don't tire easily," he replied. Still, the endless hearings, paperwork, and interviews took their toll. Reporters occasionally came to the ranch, asking for comments, snapping photos, trying to turn his story into a political debate. Miles never gave them what they wanted. He stayed quiet, patient, and strategic, knowing that integrity didn't need publicity, it just needed proof. Then, one morning, a small envelope arrived at his door, sealed with a federal stamp. It was from Major Daniels. The letter inside was short and to the point. Case update, HOA audit complete. Wilson's assets frozen. New charges filed, fraud, bribery, and witness tampering. Miles let out a long breath as he read. "It's done," he whispered. Later that day, Daniels called. "You should know, she tried to get her story into a national outlet," he said. "But the editors pulled it when we sent them the evidence. She's finished, Miles." For the first time in months, he felt the tension in his chest ease. "Thank you," he said simply. "You did good," Daniels replied. "You didn't just win back your land. You exposed an entire network of corruption. That takes grit." That evening, the sunset over the ranch glowed like fire on the lake. Sarah brought 2 cups of coffee, and they sat together on the porch, watching the light fade across the water. "It's really over," she said softly. "For real this time." Miles smiled faintly. "For real," he said. But even as he spoke, his mind replayed everything. The lies, the threats, the courtroom scenes, and the sight of Karen's smirk the first day he returned home. "You think she'll ever understand what she did?" Sarah asked quietly. Miles looked out at the horizon. "People like her don't understand," he said. "They justify. They twist things until they're the hero in their own story." "And you?" she asked. "What's your story now?" He chuckled softly. "Just a man fixing a fence, drinking coffee, and trying to make peace with the land his father loved." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "You know," she said gently, "your father would have been proud." Miles's eyes softened. "Maybe. But I think he'd tell me what he always did: don't gloat. Do good. Then move on." They sat there quietly, the night breeze rustling the trees, the faint sound of crickets returning to the silence that once belonged to the land. And somewhere beyond the hills, far from Maple Creek, Karen Wilson faced the beginning of her trial, surrounded by the same arrogance that had built her downfall. Miles didn't care to watch. He'd already won, not in the papers, not in court, but in principle. His father's land was whole again, his name cleared, and his community free. When the stars finally appeared overhead, he stood, looked out at the wide open space before him, and said softly, "Home. Finally home." The morning air carried a rare stillness across the ranch, the kind of peace that felt almost unreal after months of chaos and noise. The trial had ended days ago, and the verdict was clear. Karen Wilson and 2 of her board members were found guilty on all charges: fraud, falsifying documents, and abuse of authority. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of more once the other investigations finished. The news spread through the town like wildfire, but for Miles, it didn't bring celebration, it brought quiet relief. He woke early that day, as he always did, walking along the edge of the lake with a mug of black coffee in hand. The sky was pale blue, the water calm, and for the first time in a long while, he could hear nothing but nature. No angry voices. No legal calls. No HOA harassment. Just peace. Yet, as he walked, he couldn't shake the memories of everything that had happened. The day he found the fence around his land, the sound of Karen's mocking laughter, the courtroom tension, the sleepless nights wondering if the truth would ever matter. Every step on the gravel reminded him how close he had come to losing everything his father had built. At the far end of the property stood the old wooden dock his father had once repaired by hand. It had weathered years of storms but still stood firm, just like the man who built it. Miles sat down at the edge, staring out at the reflection of the morning sky. The still water mirrored his thoughts, clear on the surface, deep underneath. He had fought battles in deserts and jungles, but none tested his patience and resolve like this one. The enemy here hadn't worn a uniform. They'd worn smiles, titles, and fake authority. Sarah joined him a few minutes later, bringing another cup of coffee. "You're up early," she said softly. "Couldn't sleep," he replied, his eyes still on the water. "Every time I close my eyes, I keep thinking about how it all started. How easy it was for them to almost take everything. But they didn't," she reminded him gently. "You stopped them. And not just for you, for everyone they hurt." Miles gave a faint smile. "Maybe. But it makes me wonder how many others they did this to. How many people just gave up because they didn't know how to fight back." Sarah sat beside him quietly for a moment. "Maybe that's why you had to be the one to stop them," she said. "So others could see it's possible." Her words lingered in the air like a soft truth. Miles didn't reply right away. He just nodded slowly, knowing she was right. Later that afternoon, he drove into town for the first time since the verdict. The once intimidating HOA office was now empty, the sign removed, and the building up for sale. As he passed it, a group of neighbors waved from across the street. Some smiled shyly, others came over to shake his hand. "You did good, Miles," one man said. "We didn't think anyone could stand up to her." "We were scared," another woman admitted. "But you gave us courage." Miles nodded, humbled. "You all deserved better. Don't ever let anyone make you feel powerless again." When he stopped by the local diner for lunch, the waitress, an older lady who had watched the whole story unfold, brought him a slice of pie on the house. "You earned it," she said with a wink. "Not everyone fights for what's right anymore." He smiled. "Thank you. I'll take that as a medal of honor." The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. As he drove back to the ranch, he noticed how the community had changed. Houses once uniform now carried different colors, porches were decorated with flowers, and laughter echoed from backyards that used to be silent. The fear that had ruled the place was gone. He realized then that this wasn't just a victory for him. It was a reset for everyone. But life had a way of testing peace, even when you thought the fight was over. As the sun began to set, a county official's car pulled up at his gate. Miles recognized the man immediately, Deputy Martin, one of Sheriff Collins's assistants. "Evening, Mr. Carter," Martin said as he stepped out. "Sorry to bother you. We just wrapped up the last of the HOA evidence review and found something interesting." Miles raised an eyebrow. "What kind of interesting?" Martin handed him a folder. "Turns out Karen wasn't acting alone in all of this. There's a developer, someone higher up, who was funding her projects and covering the fake property transfers. He's under investigation now, but his company owns a few other HOA-managed neighborhoods nearby. You might want to keep an eye open." Miles flipped through the pages. The name printed across the top was bold and familiar, Harrison and Westland Development Group. He frowned. "I've heard of them. Big firm out of the capital, right?" "That's the one," Martin said. "They've got friends in local politics. We think Karen was just a small part of a much bigger operation." "And what happens now?" Miles asked. "Now?" Martin gave a small smile. "Now the feds dig deeper. But between us, they might want your insight. You know this mess better than anyone." Miles nodded slowly. "If they need me, they know where to find me." As the deputy drove away, Miles looked down at the papers again. The victory suddenly felt smaller, not because it didn't matter, but because the fight was far from over. He had exposed one branch of corruption, but the roots went deeper. Still, he didn't feel anger, just focus. That night, as he sat on his porch, the stars glittering above, he pulled out his father's old notebook from the drawer. Inside were hand-drawn sketches of the land, old maps, and a line his father had once written, "Guard what's yours, but don't forget to guard what's right." Miles ran his finger over the words and whispered, "I hear you, Dad." The crickets sang in the dark, the lake shimmered under moonlight, and somewhere deep in his heart, he knew this wasn't the end of his story, it was the beginning of a new one. He wasn't just a soldier or a son anymore. He had become something else entirely, a protector, not through rank or weapon, but through truth. And as the night wind carried through the open fields, Miles Carter made himself a quiet promise. No matter who came next, No matter what power tried to corrupt the land again, he'd be ready. Because this time, he wasn't just defending his home. He was defending everyone's right to have one. A few months later, the season began to change, and the golden leaves along Pine Ridge shimmered in the cool autumn wind, whispering stories of peace hard-earned and justice restored. The lake glowed beneath the sunset, calm and mirror-like, reflecting the rebuilt fences, the repainted barns, and the steady rhythm of a town finally finding its balance again. Miles stood on his porch, his hands resting on the railing, watching the world grow quiet. The headlines had long since faded from the news, the courtroom drama forgotten by those who hadn't lived through it. But for him, every sound of the wind through the trees still carried the weight of the struggle. He had rebuilt the ranch slowly, piece by piece, repairing the damage the construction crews had left, restoring the small dock where his father used to fish, planting new trees where the land had been torn open. The place felt alive again, breathing in rhythm with the wind, and every sunrise reminded him that peace was something you earned, not something you found. But the fight had left its mark. He had grown quieter, his eyes sharper, his patience deeper. He no longer saw the world in simple lines of good and bad. He saw the small choices that built both. That morning, as he was clearing the last pile of old debris by the fence, Sarah walked up with 2 mugs of coffee, her hair pulled back, her expression calm but knowing. "You've been working since dawn," she said softly. "You're supposed to be resting." "Resting doesn't sit well with me," he replied, smiling faintly. "Besides, there's still work to do." She handed him the mug and leaned against the post beside him. "It's strange," she said after a moment. "All that time, we thought you were fighting to save one piece of land. But I think you were saving the whole town." Miles sipped his coffee, eyes on the horizon. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I was just reminding people that they could stand up again." She smiled. "Same thing." The sound of a truck engine broke the quiet, and they both turned to see a black government SUV pulling up near the gate. Miles recognized it instantly. It was the same kind the investigators had used months ago. When the door opened, Agent Brooks stepped out, his expression calm but purposeful. "Morning, Commander," Brooks said, walking up with a folder under his arm. "Sorry to drop in unannounced, but I thought you should see this." Miles set down his mug. "What's going on?" Brooks handed him the folder. Inside were several photographs, new development plans, contracts, and maps marked with red outlines. The names at the top were all too familiar: Harrison and Westland Development Group. "We thought the investigation was over," Brooks said, "but it turns out your hunch was right. Karen was just one of several HOA presidents involved. Her arrest rattled the chain, and now we've traced the same fraudulent paperwork to 3 other communities across the state." Miles's jaw tightened as he studied the documents. "So it's bigger than anyone thought." "Much bigger," Brooks said. "The Bureau's forming a task group to shut them down, and we could use your help. You know how these HOAs operate, how they hide under paperwork and titles. We want someone who's seen it up close." Sarah glanced at Miles. "You're not really thinking about jumping back into it, are you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out toward the lake, where the sunlight caught the surface and flashed like glass. He thought about his father's words, about protecting what's right, not just what's yours. Finally, he turned back to Brooks. "I'll help," he said, "but only if it's done clean. No politics, no favors. Just the truth." Brooks smiled slightly. "That's exactly why we came to you." He shook Miles's hand firmly before heading back to the car. As the SUV disappeared down the road, Sarah exhaled softly. "You really are going back to war," she said. "Not the kind with bullets," he replied, picking up his gloves again. "The kind with paper, power, and greed, and those are the ones that never really end." That evening, the air grew colder, the sky turning violet as the sun dipped behind the hills. Miles stood alone by the dock, the water lapping gently at the wooden posts. He thought about all the people who'd been crushed by invisible rules, about families who'd lost their homes, about soldiers like him who'd come home to find what they fought for stolen by signatures and stamps. He felt the old fire stirring again, the same resolve that had carried him through every storm. This time, he wouldn't be fighting for one ranch. He'd be fighting for everyone who didn't have the strength, the time, or the knowledge to fight for themselves. As night settled, he turned back toward the house where Sarah had already lit the porch light. "You're coming in," she called. "In a minute," he said. He looked out at the land one last time, the wind brushing through the tall grass like an old friend. The ranch stood quiet but strong, no longer just a symbol of what was lost, but of what was worth protecting. He took a deep breath, then whispered into the dusk, "You were right, Dad. Some fights never end. But this time, I'm ready." And as the stars emerged one by one over the lake, Miles Carter, the soldier, the son, the man who stood alone against an empire of corruption, walked back toward his home, knowing that peace wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of the next battle for what was right.